We have another approach for styling our components called CSS-in-JS. I have to say that it's a controversial technology. Some people love it, some people hate it. But the idea is that we can write all the styles for a component next to its definition in a JavaScript or TypeScript file. And this gives us a number of benefits. The first benefit is that just like CSS modules, our styles are going to be scoped. So we're not going to run into name conflicts. The second benefit is that all the CSS and JavaScript or TypeScript code required to build a component is going to be in one place in a single file. And that means if tomorrow we decide that we no longer need a component, it's much easier to delete that component. We simply delete that file, and that's not going to impact anywhere else in our application. In contrast, if our component is spread into multiple files, to delete it, we have to delete different files from our project. The fourth benefit is that because our CSS is right next to our JavaScript or TypeScript code, it'll be easier to style a component based on its props or state. You'll see that later in this video. Now, there are different libraries that implement this concept, but the most popular ones are styled components, emotion, and polished. And of course, there are many, many more. In this lesson, I'm going to give you a tour of styled components. So I have removed the CSS module that I created in the previous lesson. So now we have just a regular CSS file, and I'm going to show you how we can transition from this and adopt this other approach called CSS-in-JS. First, we open up the terminal and install a library called styled components. Okay, good. Now, back to our list group component. On the top, we import styled from styled components. Now here we get a TypeScript warning saying could not find a declaration file for module styled components. So the TypeScript compiler doesn't know about the type of objects defined in this library. This problem might be solved in the future versions of this library, but at the time of recording this video, we have to install the type definitions for this library separately. So we go back to the terminal and install a library called @types/styled components. So @types is a repository that contains type definitions for various popular JavaScript libraries. Let's go ahead. Good. Now, the warning goes away that using this style object, we can create styled components. For example, look over here. There are two places where we're applying styles. One is for our UL. The other place is for our LI. So with styled components, we no longer use class name. Instead, we create a React component that has all the styles we want right here. So on the top, here we type styled dot. Now in this object, we have pretty much every HTML element that you can think of. So we have buttons, we have ULs, and so on. So we're going to create a UL that is styled. Now here we use the backtick character. And in between the backticks, we define all the styles for this UL. So those styles are currently defined in this CSS file. I'm going to grab these and move them here. Now, the return value of this is going to be a React component that has all these styles applied to it. So we can store the result in a component called UL, or we can call it list. That is nicer. Now, instead of using a regular HTML element, we use that React component. So list, and we should also rename the closing tag. That is the idea. Now let's do the same change with our list item. So on the top, we type styled.li. Once again, we use backticks. Now for this demo, I'm just going to apply a padding to each list item. So a vertical padding of 5 pixels. Now, once again, this returns a React component. We can call that list item. And with this, we remove the regular HTML element. So we replace this with our list item component. Now, we should remove the class name prop. Okay. And we should also rename the closing tag. Okay. Now, let's see what we have done here. With this change, our JSX markup only represents the structure and no styling. So all the styling is done on the top in a single place. So everything we need to build a list group component is included in this file in a single place. If tomorrow we decide that we no longer need this component, we can just delete this file. We don't have to find unused code and risk breaking changes in our application. Now, let me show you one more benefit. I told you that with this approach, it's easier to style a component based on its props or state. So earlier, we had a piece of logic where we applied the active class dynamically based on the index of the selected item. So earlier we declared a state variable called selectedIndex. I'm going to initialize this to 0. Let's imagine that we want to select the first item. Now earlier we applied the active class dynamically if the index of the current item was equal to the selected index. How can we implement this scenario using styled components? Well, we can give this component a prop like active, and we can set this to a Boolean expression like if index equals selected index. Okay. Now here we have a compilation error. So to solve this, we have to define the shape of props for this component using an interface. So up here, just before creating this component, we define an interface. We can call it list item props, so we can separate it from the props for our list group. Now here we need a property called active of type Boolean. Now when creating this list item component, we add angle brackets and pass an interface that represents the shape of props. So list item props. Okay, with that, the warning goes away. Great. Now the final part. Let's say if a list item is active, we want to give it a blue background. So here we set the background, but instead of setting it to blue, we want to set this dynamically based on the active prop. So here we can use a template literal in JavaScript or TypeScript. We type a $sign with braces. Inside the braces, we type an arrow function that takes the props. Now here we check if props that active is true. And by the way, did you notice that here we have auto-completion? So because we specified the shape of the props using this interface, now we can see the active property in the auto-completion box. So if active is true, we're going to return, let's say blue. Otherwise, we're going to return none. Now save the changes, back to the browser. Look, the first item has a blue background.